Today I'm going to be answering some of your language learning questions about French. For context, for proof, for receipts, whatever it is that you want to call it, I started learning French when I was in high school. I did it for about 4 years. I did an exam in it. I also entered some French competitions and won them. It was a team competition though, so it wasn't just me, but I was a part of that team and we won 2 years in a row. After that, I did a beginner French class in university as an elective, and I started to learn French on my own again in 2020 when I realized that most of the things I learned in school were not applicable in real life. Then I took some classes last year with the Alliance Française de la Jamaïque for about 2 months. Then I took the DELF B2 exam in December. I passed it, and now I have a diploma in French, level B2. So there you have it. First question. Any tips on how to learn French? I could go on and on about this, and I do have lots of videos on my TikTok about this, but my biggest tip is to start immersing in the language from the moment you start learning French. Start immersing and also start practicing to speak. Because some of the biggest issues that we have as language learners is the fact that we don't understand French speakers when they're speaking, and we also don't know how to pronounce the words properly, or we don't have a very good pronunciation. So you have to get comfortable with speaking the language, with the pronunciation, and you also need to get comfortable with hearing actual French people speak. This is how immersion comes in. Whenever you're watching anything, make sure that you repeat what you hear so that you can practice speaking, and also speak a lot to your friends who are learning French, or if you don't have friends who are learning French, you can always find people on Hello Talk to do language exchanges with. If you have language events in your country, be sure to go to those. It might be scary at first, but it really helps. Now, when it comes to immersion in the language, what I mean is that you need to surround yourself in the language as much as possible. So watch movies, watch TV shows, watch cartoons. Cartoons are actually very interesting and they help a lot as a beginner. I'm currently watching Miraculous Ladybug and it has helped me to learn a lot of things. So don't sleep on cartoons, they're pretty helpful. Also, create a playlist with music that you like and listen to that over and over again. Try to sing along as well when you're learning so that you can practice your pronunciation. Find children's stories to read. You can find some of them online. And also, listen to podcasts. Podcasts are actually one of my favorite things to do when it comes to learning languages. So I always recommend listening to a podcast. You can always find different levels of podcasts online. So definitely look into listening to podcasts. Est-ce que tu peux recommander quelques podcasts français pour écouter? Basically asking if I can recommend some podcasts to listen to. Yes, 100% I can. So three of the podcasts I really like listening to are the podcasts that I've listened to the most when it comes to learning French would be Inner French for beginners, le podcast Fluidité for intermediate learners, and also J'ai peur donc j'y vais if you're going on to being an advanced learner. That one is currently my favorite. For Inner French, I started out with his YouTube videos. I used to watch the videos and also read the subtitles at the same time, so that way I get a better understanding of how words are pronounced in French. One of the issues that we usually have as language learners when it comes to French is the fact that the way that they speak French doesn't look or doesn't sound like how the words look. So when you see the subtitles and you're listening at the same time, you get a mental idea of what the words should sound like, which helps you to understand and improve your pronunciation. I started out with watching the videos and also using subtitles. If you have to adjust the speed to make it slower, do that. There's no shame in doing that. And eventually, I moved on to listening to his podcast on Google, and I found the transcript online, and I would read while I'm listening to practice pronunciation. This is called a shadowing technique, and I will speak on that a little bit more later. The next podcast, the podcast Fluidité, I started listening to it when I started to become more comfortable. So this was around in 2022, I believe. I would listen to an episode almost every day. They're quite short. You have some that are like 8 minutes, so it wasn't difficult for me to listen to them. I would listen to it while I was having breakfast. I continued listening to those podcasts for like a few months, I believe. So about 2, 3 podcasts per week for a couple of months. And eventually it started becoming a lot easier for me to understand when he was speaking French. Unlike the first podcast, Inner French, he speaks at a normal pace. In Inner French, he tends to speak a little bit slower, which is why I recommend that for beginners. But for Le Podcast Fluidité, he speaks at a normal pace, so that will help you to get more accustomed to how French people speak. He talks about pop culture, he talks about French culture, he talks about his life in France. So you can find a couple episodes that are quite interesting and you can learn from them. The last one, which is currently my favorite, is J'ai peur donc j'y vais. I love this podcast. Unlike the first two, it's not made for French learners. The intent isn't for French learners, it's for people who can speak French. So I recommend listening to this one when you're getting to a more advanced level because it will help you to improve your vocabulary and also how people speak. I personally enjoy listening to this podcast because her voice is really, really soothing, but also she talks about topics that I'm personally interested in. So she talks about self development, self growth, how to create a fulfilling life, and things like that. So, personally, one of my favorites, if not my all time favorite, I love this podcast and I would always recommend listening to this podcast, especially if you're starting to deepen your understanding of French and you want something a little bit more challenging. For other podcasts, I've actually created this ebook that has a list of different resources that you can use to learn French. Not only just podcasts, but you also can find different series in it. You can find YouTube videos and you can find other resources such as textbooks. So if you are interested in finding out about more resources that you can use to learn French, then go check out this ebook. I'm going to link it in the description. Question number 3, I think. How are you learning French? Honestly, right now I'm using mostly immersion. So I've been watching this cartoon Miraculous Ladybug for about 2 months or so now. I actually finished it, but I love it so much. I'm rewatching some episodes. I like this cartoon a lot because it's a French made cartoon. So, unlike the other cartoons that I used to watch, this one actually speaks at the pace that French people speak at. They speak normally. That's what I'm trying to say. I learn a lot from it. I also learn a lot of slang as well, the way how they say different things, and I make a note of those. So that's really what I'm doing right now to learn French. I use immersion. So I listen to music. I've been watching that cartoon, making notes of new words and using them if I can. I've also been watching YouTube videos, TikTok videos. I follow TikTok influencers or people who speak French on TikTok so that whenever I am using TikTok or Instagram, I'm always watching something with French. And then the more you do that, the more they recommend it to you. I've also been going to language events in my country, which helps a lot with meeting other persons who are learning French and also to practice speaking French as well. Outside of that, I have language exchanges with my friends who are learning French. So it's more so of me putting what I've learned into practice now, since my goal this year is to actually become fluent in French. And one of the biggest aspects of that for me is being able to speak the language. Next question, which actually ties in very well with the one from before. Are there any language events in Jamaica? Yes, I just mentioned that I do go to some of them. So the ones I go to are Film du Mois avec l'Alliance Française de la Jamaïque, French Talk Wednesdays with the same organization, and also a language link up. Each of these events happen once per month. French Talk Wednesdays is where you go, you meet persons who speak French, persons who are learning to speak French, and you have conversations with them. Film du Mois is where you go to watch a movie. It is a French movie, and you usually have subtitles either in English only or in English and French. Whenever I'm watching the movie, I take a note of things that I hear so that I can practice using them as well. The last one, Language Link Up, isn't only for French learners, it's for language learners in general. So you meet people who speak different languages, people who speak French, people who speak Spanish, people who speak other languages as well. So that one is a good one to go to if you want to learn multiple languages. If you want more information, you can always check out their social media pages. De l'Alliance Française is this one, and Language Link Up, you can check out this one for more information. Next question. I've built my playlist like you suggested, and I used your suggestion. You're welcome. I'm so happy I could help. I'm trying to learn vocabulary. Any tips? It goes back to immersing in the language again. To be honest, I actually do use lists to help me learn vocabulary. So, for example, I have lists of things around the house. So I just review that whenever I need to. I know that some persons don't like learning with flashcards or with lists, but personally, it's something that has helped me when it comes to learning objects, because objects are, well, objects. You don't really need much context when you're using words of objects you use around the house. So I use lists to learn those and I put them into Quizlet and review them whenever I can. Using Quizlet sometimes feels like listening to a podcast because they actually do say the words out loud. So that's very convenient if you're doing something. For example, you can just listen to your lists while you're doing that. The other thing I would suggest is to immerse in the language, because honestly, I think that's the best way to learn vocabulary. That way, you get to see how words are used in context. Continue watching your movies, your series, listen to your podcast. Listening to the radio is also a very good one to help you learn new vocabulary. The biggest one I would recommend is to start reading some more because you get to see how words are used in context. You can always stop and research it and come back and reread it again, and then you can make notes of the words. But whenever you're learning new words, try to at least use them in a sentence so that you understand what they're saying, because just learning the word on its own won't be very helpful if you don't know how to use it. If you want more reading recommendations, you can also check out the ebook because I do have some recommendations in there as well of websites that you can find to read different articles in French. Next question. I think that your pronunciation is good. Thank you. I try to learn French too. Any exercises for achieving that good pronunciation? This is what I mentioned before in that other question. It's called the shadowing technique. So basically, what you're going to do is you're going to find something to listen to. I would recommend using a podcast for this because it helps a lot. And usually, you can find transcripts online when you're listening to podcasts. The ones that I used the most to do this was Inner French because I did find those transcripts. So, what you're going to do is you're going to listen to the podcast to get familiar with what they're saying. And then when you're listening to it again, you're going to read at the same time so that you can practice pronouncing the words when they're saying it. So while you're hearing what they're saying, you can also practice what they're saying using the same intonation, the same inflection, using the same emotions. This will help you to increase or improve your pronunciation because then you get to see how people actually pronounce words while they're speaking. Another thing I would recommend as well is to practice speaking as much as possible, even if that means that you have to speak by yourself. I do this thing where every week I feel myself just speaking French, and that has helped me a lot to improve my pronunciation. And also, whenever I'm watching or listening to anything, if I find it a bit challenging to say, I would repeat whatever it is that they're saying over and over and try to say it as well so that I get used to saying it how they're saying it. And that has really helped me to improve my pronunciation. And the last question, could you share with me some resources you use? This is honestly the reason why I created that ebook because I get this question a lot to share the resources I use, but it's quite a lengthy list. So I created the ebook so that you guys can actually have access to the resources that I've used. I include some textbooks in there. If you want to see more YouTube channels, reading material, websites that I've used, even a playlist, this is also in the ebook. I also have a YouTube video on this very topic, resources that you can use to learn French. I'll also link that down below in the description. And this ebook is actually a part of a package. So once you get the ebook, you also have access to two other products, a French checklist with a list of topics that you can learn, and also a French conjugation table with 16 irregular verbs. So it's a package and you get 3 different digital products to help you on your French learning journey. I hope that helps. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll respond as soon as I can. I will have a link to the ebooks in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video has helped. See you in the next one.